We watch that we don't shift or slide into German. We're starting in English right away. Okay.
Okay. At the last installment, you spoke about your projects in Tokyo, about your experimental work together with Polaroid, later with Fujifilm, and there was also the question of how to transfer photograph to fabrics, which different ways to present photographic work do exist today on mirrors, as mentioned already, on fabrics. What was the state of the art in
So
this
what
time?
I can show you today, so I kind of dressed myself up a little bit. I kept the standard sweater because it's cold and because this is part of our session. Wait, let me open this. What you see here, that's the timetable I mentioned.
Yeah.
So this comes after the textile that I made from photographs. What you see here, this is originally a photograph. You see a little bit that is a palm leaves. And I started photographing like this in Manila. And then I made that lecture with Polaroid in Tokyo. And then I made that, what I mentioned to you, the exhibition where we did digital printing of these kind of photos. But it was still on paper. So there's quite a long time, development time, like from the mid-80s to let's say almost the mid-90s, where in Japan, still living in Japan, I was working with knitting wear people, with silk weaving people who made neckties, who made the kimono belt kind of thing. So when I came with those samples into Vienna, I was introduced to Backhausen, a well-known Viennese, or we should say Austrian textile company, and they loved it. This was woven by Backhausen. And it's kind of, I think, I can't tell you exactly the material. I think it's a kind of a mixed kind of thing, a synthetic or something. This kind of textile can be used for curtains, making bags. I made some bags. And I use it because that's the easiest way to use it and to present it. I had made these vests because it's practical. I can use it, and when I go to a meeting, I can show them. The way the company or the way the business went, they were famous for the Art Nouveau, no? Colomosa. They made a lot of money with that. And of course, they always had a little bit independent design, but not much. So this was a dramatic shift to them to do this. But they made the research and they said, this is one of a kind, we want to do that. I think I mentioned this before also. I think I'm generally speaking, always have been looking at the fashion industry because I just enjoy doing it, or when I go window shopping, not that I buy, I just look what's going on, I enjoy it. And of course there are images from plants and everything, but many times they're either very realistic photographs or they're graphics from, depending on what kind of fashion, beachwear or like sportswear, whatever, they're all. This kind of thing where somebody takes a photograph and you see the reason why this photograph is not right away recognizable as what it is, because I didn't photograph it straight on. I used filter system to break up the image, if you want to say. And therefore I create a whole different thing. And the variation in the image is mainly through the wind that moves the leaves, and then how the light comes through. That creates fantastic variety of photographs. I also used these photographs in Tokyo for multivision. I made some multimedia events and we used projection. my images in multivision to create a kind of a fantasy world, if you want to say that. And today is a new day, if you want to say. It's like I made an exhibition in Vienna with this stuff, and I mentioned that this exhibition in Vienna was taken directly one-to-one, was taken for a presentation in Tokyo by Ricoh to show their new products. That was in '96. So now we got 25. Well, we almost got 25 years more now.
So, in fact, what you invented, and it's really a form of invention, is genuine fashion photography. You do not, like the others, make shots of ready-made fashion and the model is in the center of the photograph, but in fact you take the photograph and the photograph turns into fashion.
Well, the thing is, how can I say? I don't connect this way automatically. It is just that fashion was always a kind of, if I want to say, an interest. While I was even going to studying photography, I started, at that time in the mid-late 60s, it was quite cheap to make your own clothes. Here in Vienna, you would go Judengasse or some other tailors. You bring in the material and they make you a suit, they make you a jacket. So I was doing a lot of that, I was doing this. I bought some material and then I went to the tailor and I made a jacket or pants or whatever. I enjoyed I'm not a tailor, right? But I enjoyed making that fashion. And you could get some fashion that at that time not necessarily was available in the market. Mm-hmm. So I had that, if you want to say, that flair or that flavor or that talent or whatever. And in this particular case, how I came to create this kind of image was I had done a lot of photography. We're talking about mid-80s. So at that point you can say roughly, I started in the mid-60s, so I was involved in photography for about 20 years. And I had reached, if you want to say, a certain level as a photographer where I knew I can do this kind of photography which I was appreciated for in color as well as in black and white. The kind of combination of an editorial, documentary, social documentary kind of photography. I can do this, the way you say, I can do this while I'm asleep, so to speak. No? I just could do it. I didn't have to make an effort, if you wanted it. So I was looking for another thing. I wanted to step out from that. And I decided, I have to kind of deconstruct a natural image like this. I wasn't thinking of textile from the beginning. It was basically a kind of, if you want to say, a photographic, or if you want to say a visual kind of exercise to get beyond the photography that I was involved in already about 20 years. So I bought all kinds of filters, optical filters and some color filters, and I experimented with different lenses, and I photographed. So you have to understand that that time also, Polaroid supported me initially with some of the films, but then Fuji just gave me endless amount of films. Just how many films you need, Oh, I need 30 films. Okay, 30 films. Transparency. I said, well, I'm going to pick on a month now. Well, do you need 100 films? No, 60 films is enough. It was, it was possible to work freely. Mm-hmm. And then they gave me money to process the whole thing, So they supported this in a good way, And today, unless it's a really high-end commercial job, you wouldn't be able to photograph that way. Mm-hmm. And at this point, it's hard. Most of not all, but most of the jobs are done digitally. So that's why many times people do not appreciate the digital work because, very simple, you just have it on a sensor, on a card, and then you put it in the computer. What the people forget that sometimes the main work is the post-production. Selecting, correcting, doing this, doing that, etc. So, two worlds to work, analog and digital. And of course, what I can do now with I have the equipment, I have the lenses, the same lenses that I had used in the 80s. I have the lenses. I still have the filter system, and I did some testing on my digital camera, and I know I can do the same work digitally. The difference will be the transmission, or if you want to say the transformation from the photographic image to the image that leads to textile or any other application for digital technology. The main difference is, you talk mid 80s. I'm photographing analog on a color direct positive film. When this film was scanned, the scanner would see things that the eye doesn't see, especially in the area of the graduation from sharp to unsharp. There's a world of information for the scanner. For the eye, it's a graduation, a smooth thing. The way the scanner broke it down, it created additional abstraction, if you want to say. That way, when we print it, we could see things in the print that you wouldn't see if you were printing the same image in a photographic way. Because it was for me not only a question of going beyond photography in the photographic process, also in the post-production, meaning developing, printing, etc. I was looking to do something outside photography. Like I had a lot of experience of showing my color work, which I had processed by the lab on Chrome. That was the best way you could make a color photograph exhibition. I wanted to go beyond that. It had its own beauty, it had its own aesthetic, Chrome. And I did not want to show my abstract photographs photographically. I wanted to go pre-electronic, right? And at this point, the pre-electronic is already almost, a post-digital already, because of the advancement of technology. And post-digital in the sense, you can now digitally create everything so realistically that I didn't want then and I don't want today. So that means whatever a digital camera gives me as a result with the same visual and optical technique, I then have to look at the post-production. How much do I enter in the post-production in order to create an image that makes it interesting? Because people are not interested, generally speaking, to look at a photograph that's printed on a shirt or on a coat or on a bag and say, this is tree such and such and this is plant such and such. It's not interesting, generally speaking. So through technology was driving the initial project, and technology will again drive this. And this is at the same time essentially the whole history of photography, how technology drove photography in the sense, initially it was, or if you want, the first picture was a hole in the wall and projecting it on a wall, and there was a film sensitive something, and so you have a huge picture. The pinhole photography, and slowly the lenses come in, the glass plates, the films come in, all kinds of visual, all kinds of chemical and all kind of visual technical stuff came in to be able to reproduce. The interesting thing which people understand today is that photography was actually really never a reproduction media. But initially it was a desire to reproduce reality. Very soon people came to the point, we are not reproducing reality. At least we are interpreting reality. Till people realized this is a whole new world. But there was still, painting was still very strong, right? Also figurative painting was very strong. So photography was like in a supportive role for painters. Very quickly, photography took off on its own. Interesting enough, it's, 180 years now or something like that? I can say is, while there still is the discussion going on about photography showing reality. That is still part of, every time you're reading about a lens, about any kind of film or digital media that people work with, they're always talking about reality and objectivity, etc. It's still part of the discussion, and it's actually, you can say, it's kind of vanity, because it's a kind of a vanity, and I think it has to do with that people many times cannot really grasp photography, what it is. For me, essentially, the main difference between, if you want to say photography and painting, is the whole creative process is different. So I will never compare these two media. And you remember that even the what seemed to be just a little change, if you look at painting, oil painting and acrylic painting. Initially it was just, okay, I can do faster with acrylic, or I can get stronger colors, or whatever. If you look carefully, there's a whole different development in photography thanks to the nature of the painting material. The photography is a whole different ballgame. And for me, while I never have given up to use photography as a documentary media, it is not necessarily a documentary media to every other documentary photography. It's still a question of your thinking. It's still a question of where you go, what you do, when you do it, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. Photography wouldn't be alive if there wasn't all these fine differences from photographer to photographer.
But I think it's also the question of the observer, the one who observes your photographic work.
Yeah.
Because, for instance, going back to our first video, going back to Black Woodstock, in fact, that's great documentary, social documentary photography,
Yeah,
even if it was not intended to be, but it was.
yeah,
And on the other hand, what I found really astonishing when looking at the internet, at issue, at your books, the volumes of your work that you uploaded there, that's the mixture of more or less very realistic work, very abstract, nearly conceptualist work, the mixture between black and white or monochrome photography and strong color photography. So you never was on one certain rail. You always were changing your approach to the world.
I
And
can,
this is reflected in your work.
I can give an interesting observation by a director of a picture agency in Tokyo. Was an American fellow who was also representing the Magnum people, but he also had other works that he represented. He came to an exhibition of mine in the late 70s where I showed parallel black and white photographs and I projected color images. Both were taken at the same time. Both were taken at the same time in Okinawa.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had, I had two cameras. One camera was Kodachrome, the other camera was Tri-X black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew how I'm going to use it. That's how I chose the lenses, and that's how I chose composition, so I chose the thing. The color, I knew I'm going to use it for projection. I was not thinking of printing. I'm going to use it for projection. Black and white, I knew I'm going to print. And he was surprised because he worked with a lot of different photographers, but all of them were specialists. And he said, "Did you photograph this at the same time, color and black and white?" I said, "Yeah, two cameras." So for him, this was a unique experience. Mm-hmm. And I can give you one little example that this is like almost like a fantasy thing. He was representing an American photographer, senior photographer, and he also was representing a Japanese photographer who was kind of middle-aged. And that Japanese photographer, who was initially an assistant of another Japanese photographer, going to the United States, doing black and white photography, upon returning to Japan and photographing in Asia, he switched to color.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing, in that process, this American photographer, when he met this Japanese photographer who he knew while living in the States, he looked at some of his black and white images, and he says, "You're photographing color." It was black and white image, but the American guy saw what the Japanese guy saw. They said he was going for the color, but he was still photographing in black and white. Anyway, the Japanese guy switched into color, and he became a well-known color photographer. And to come back to my work, I wanted to go beyond what I already had known. From my own experience, from what I had seen through education, what I had seen through exhibitions, etc. So this post-photographic pre-electronic was a very, how can I say, interesting way for me to work. It was unique. People appreciated it in Japan, and that's why they were supportive, because nobody else was going that way. And that's why they thought initially Fuji supported it, then all the companies in the post-production in the textile world supported it. And I think I haven't seen this kind of work, and that's why I can now, through the digital work, can kind of revive this project, having the same essential concept, but using digital technology. I photograph, I can also film digitally, and then use the computer and the printing technology to get an image that is unique in the world. I will do it for the same reason I did it initially in mid-80s, because I'm interested in the aesthetic process.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested also how technology always drives the photographic approach to any kind of situation.
I want to go back one step, because it was very interesting when you told the story about the art director in Japan who was surprised that you took photographs parallel in color and then black and white. It took comparatively long in the Western world, United States, Europe, that color photography was recognized as a real valuable part of the world of photography. It was this exhibition of Eggstone in the Museum of Modern Art. And in the 80s, that changed the opinion. It was the phase when everybody spoke about new color, even if there had already been color photo exhibitions in the MoMA. But in the United States and in Europe, color was something a little bit worthless, something which belonged in the world of advertisement. Was the approach in Japan different to color?
Well, the thing is this, that first of all, to the expression new color, I can only say this, that while living in Japan, I came across a book that was called New Color Photography. And basically that was large format photography using color negative. Because color photography was very strongly dominated by Kodachrome and Ektachrome. Mm-hmm. Two very different type of films, two very different ways of processing, and it kind of, like a friend of mine, actually that photographer that took me to the Black Jazz Festival or Music Festival, the Black Woodstock, he was a photojournalist, and he said to me, Ektachrome just fit to Vietnam, because what the Vietnam War was, it was the earth, the brown, deep brown, it was the green foliage, and it was the blood of the soldiers. These three colors in Ektachrome would come so dramatically. Kodachrome wouldn't have shown it that way. Mm-hmm. So he said that film was made for Vietnam. Kodachrome was considered basically a film studio. Mm-hmm. Initially, the 25 ISO film, where people would use the Nikon with the Nikon with the micro lens to do jewelry photography, away from 4x5, not even using Hasselblad, but using 35 millimeter, you could go more into the situation, and it was easier to work. That was initially that Kodachrome 25. The Kodachrome 64 then became a standard for editorial photography, and Ektachrome was really just a photojournalistic kind of thing. And Of course, you could push process it. You could do all kinds of stuff that you couldn't do with Kodachrome. Somehow, if you want to say in the artistic or in the art photography, it was exhausted, the range or the activity between these two films. That's when new color came in with large format and color negative. Japan, generally speaking, had a whole different approach with color, that they were more going for the mood. And therefore, for example, many times the extrachrome was very suitable because you could push process, you could underexpose, and you kind of, you want to say, you treated it like triax, grainier, and then you know from Japanese, not only, maybe mostly the woodblock printing, they have very moody kind of colors.
Mm-hmm.
Japanese would go in color photography that direction of the mood, to capture a Japanese mood through color photography. They were not looking at it the way the Americans were looking at it. If they wanted to break away from that, then they were looking at American. But large format cameras, even so many of them are being made in Japan, I did not see that much of an upswing as in the United States. One reason being, again, you know what it involves to carry around a large format, and now also how do you display it? There is more space for it in the United States. And having a car, you sleep in that car, and then you just climb on the roof, put the tripod up there and photograph. And there's just a whole different attitude towards space and towards living with photography in the United States, and then there's in Japan. I notice it now that I'm getting more involved again in large format photography. Of course, there's a lot of Europeans who are doing it, and but you see how many Americans are doing large format photography. And many times because they do have, generally speaking, larger space to live with than we have. And especially if they live in a small town or in the countryside, they have wonderful dark rooms and they have nice studios, and there's this kind of either like a, I don't know how to call these cars, but this is like almost like a wagon, a big thing, and they drive around with that. Like a minibus, but
it's a little bit like in the first phase of American photography at the Civil War in 1865, when they were on the road with their horse-drawn wagons with the whole laboratory on it, and developing and post-processing.
One thing that I noticed, because when I read comments, etc., because sometimes they will take pictures, portraits of certain people, and then I'm asking myself, why did you use a large format camera for this? But then when I read what the people say and how they talk, there's a desire among the Americans very strongly also to slow down. That already 35 millimeter photography with motor drive, which that technology was driving fashion, and it allowed you to do stuff in fashion with jumping and running and all kinds of stuff, that when you shoot large format to get one good image, you can't compare that, even Hasselblad, you can't compare this to a motor-driven camera, what you can do with the water splashes and all this kind of stuff. So then with digital photography, where they're saying, every day millions of photographs are being taken and being distributed through the internet, the desire comes in to slow down. So large format photography has that effect again, that the way you get up, the way you put things together, the way you're planning and saying, the light is not so good, maybe I have to go the next day. I say, well, I go anyway, let's see what's happening. And then some things you can do with cars, sometimes you have to go tracking, whatever. It's a whole different process. And that is again the situation. People forget that thinking in large format photography, some of it is reminiscent to the thinking of a painter when he takes a little thing and goes somewhere. But then many painters just take a sketchbook make a sketch, and then they make the painting in the studio. Again, it's two worlds, but the two worlds feed each other here and there. But coming back to my stuff, I show you a few color variations.
Yeah, show me some, and
I mean, there is, oops. Yeah. I mean, from what I was wearing here, right, just by changing the yarns, we came to this color. Again, changing yarns, you come to another color. Now this is a whole different image. Still is in a natural environment. Wait, no, this is artificial environment. But what I mentioned to you, the way the scanner was seeing, like I was seeing these kind of things, but you see what's happening in between here? Mm-hmm. That is what the scanner sees in the autofocus area, and it was transported into the textile. Mm-hmm. Originally, the color was actually more like that. Just by changing the yarns, we got this.
Mm-hmm. The other, that's more or less glimped colors.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. Here's one that is basically a nighttime shooting.
Uh-huh.
And here again, also, by changing the yarns, we came to this color.
Mm-hmm.
This again goes back to the image I was wearing, and I showed you before. Changing the colors of the yarns, we get another image. So, having gone through this process of doing this with weaving, I take that as an inspiration for the next generation of images, where I will photograph digitally, and I will produce some images in the computer, and then print it digitally, and then I have the choice. I can print it on nice paper, I can print it on textile, I can print it on wood, I can print it on steel, I can do all kinds of different prints. And take it from there. Let's see. So, how much time we still got?
I think we should stop in about 4 or 5 minutes, then we have 35 minutes, that's
Okay.
perfect.
So what I do, then I just briefly introduce.
Yeah, it's a little bit exhibitionistic, yeah?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what is this?
What is this? I mentioned to you last time, this is really a very long story how I came to this, but to make it plain and simple, it's my diary, my daily diary on a Japanese paper where I record my daily activities in stripes. And a friend of mine saw my exhibition. I started this in 91 in Tokyo, and I made an exhibition in 92 in Tokyo. A friend of mine saw it, and her husband is a fashion designer. And she said, show this to my husband. And he liked one particular section, and that's what turned into this shirt. This was 92, and this was shown then in 93 for spring summer 93, and in Paris. And it was a very successful product. Of course, he had many different shirts, his own design. He bought designs from other designers. Mm-hmm. And this was, so to speak, a best-selling shirt. But it's not in the millions. It was a matter of, 30, 40, or 50 shirts. But it's the high end. It was like, in today's money, it was like 400 euros or something like that for a shirt. Because he was in that category. He was a Japanese guy who followed the Armani line. So in the high-end men's line. I have 3 shirts of that. One is too small for me at this point. Maybe if I find a small girlfriend, I can pass that on to her. This is the largest one, I think. So I have 3. And I seldom use this. I actually use this now again for here. But I will take it to Paris, the way I take the other stuff to Paris. What I did, I made exhibitions in Japan as art. And I was sponsored at that time then by Fuji Xerox, because they had a very nice printer. And we made big exhibitions with that. From the first exhibition, the Japanese designer made this, and idea with this I followed through different technologies. So when I came back to Austria, to Lithuania in 95, I was introduced in 96 to a company where the company owner supported the arts, and he supported digital printing. And eventually we were able to print. But what I'm wearing is from the year 91, 92. This is from the year 95. So there are different kinds of colors. And here, I mean, the range of color is fantastic because it's digital. You can do endless color variation. You can reproduce every color.
And
the material is
which material is it?
It's something you call paraglider material. Or you know, when you have a sailboat, the spinnaker, the small triangular where they have the number or they have a name or something, it's that material. It's not the main. It's not the main sail. So it's being used in fashion. This was used as a windbreaker. It's not waterproof, right? As a windbreaker, it's good as a windbreaker. And we could print on it at that time, starting 97, 98 or so. We were able to do this printing. That the printers were able, and the ink was possible to be printed on this kind of material, because you have to understand that initially, since this material has some kind of it's not blocking the liquids, you couldn't use it with the old printers because it would go back through on the drum. The moment there were printers where the ink was, so to speak, sprayed on dot by dot, the piezo kind of system, it would sit on the material. It wouldn't go through the material. Then we could do this. That's the same code in the computer. In the computer, we reduce the color to black and white, and we end up with a black and white code. So, for me, this is a very attractive way of working with the digital printing technology, that I can take any kind of image and print it now on any kind of material, and can adjust the colors according to how you want to use it. And again, I will take this now to Paris again, see if there's a fresh wind going in Paris. If not, I'll introduce it in New York. And but so right now, the way I do it now with the books, and the way I do it now with the interviews here, it's a little bit, of course, first of all, it's a retrospective activity. But also it's a little bit of testing the market.
Not only. I think, and that's the reason I'm very glad that we make this series of talks. I think your ideas and the way how you present your life and your ideas and your career is very encouraging for anyone who is working in the field of photography. Not only professional, but also as an amateur, as someone who loves photography as such, because you show that it's possible to find always new ways to express yourself in photography, that it's possible to make experiments in different fields. I think that's the most important thing, that people learn that photography is not a question of gear, not a question of expensive lenses, but photography happens in the brain and in the eyes and in the mood of the photographer. And therefore I'm very grateful for you, and I hope that we will hear something completely different in the next session. So thank you very much, and again to everyone who saw these videos, subscribe to this channel. You will hear more from Hans Fleischner in the next weeks. You will see more of his work, and don't forget to take your camera with you to make your shots every day or whenever you want to make your shots, because the worst photograph is the one you don't take. have fun and rejoin us again when we meet Hans Fleischner
So
next
see you
week.
next week again.